Hi, I'm Sweis and I serve as pastor at Emmanuel Church in Middleton, Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm thrilled by your interest today. Please do check out our website and social media channels and feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. But for now, may this message be of encouragement and challenge to you on your journey to know Christ intimately, to grow in His likeness, and to show His good news to our world. Friends, sometimes we are blind to brokenness. We are blind to our own brokenness. We are blind to the brokenness around us. And besides us just not wanting to face our brokenness and it turning into blindness, I can think of at least two other reasons for this. See, sometimes our brokenness develops so gradually we don't see it happen. We don't recognize it. For example, 4 or 5 years ago, we painted our house bright yellow. We love bright colors, as you well know. And the yellow, well, the house is still yellow. But last summer, we took off one of the shutters that was breaking, and we were going to fix it. And then all of a sudden, we saw a piece of the yellow that the sun hadn't touched. And I'm telling you, it was way more yellow. It was far more vibrant. In a sense, over the last 4 or 5 years, the sun has begun to break the yellow already. And it's been so gradual that we didn't realize it till the shutter came off, and all of a sudden, there it was. Sometimes the brokenness develops so gradually, we don't see it happen. Sometimes, though, the brokenness, well, it's just been broken for so long that we no longer see it. We just get used to it, just learn to put up with it. I may have been guilty with that with our previous vehicle, that old van we had. Well, then the window wasn't working. Well, we just used the other window. And then the back windshield wiper wasn't working. Well, we just ignored that. And then the interior light wasn't working. And then something with the heating and the cooling wasn't working. And after a while, it was just a bit of a mess, that vehicle, but we just learned to put up with it. We didn't really realize it, recognize it anymore. The brokenness had been there just too long for us to really see. This seemingly was the situation in Jerusalem during the time of Nehemiah. People, after the exile, had been allowed to return, and under Zerubbabel, that first group did go back, and they rebuilt the temple. And they had even worked on the walls, as we saw last week. But for one reason or another, they hadn't completed it, or another fight had taken place that had destroyed the wall, or we don't know for sure what happened. But the reality was that 71 years later, after the completion of that second temple, the walls were still a disaster. Oh my goodness. Nehemiah hears about it. He's heartbroken over the brokenness. He fasted, he prayed. He recognized it wasn't just the wall that was broken, but it was people that were broken. And so he confessed his own sin, the sin of his family, the sin of his nation. And then in our series through his story, we're going to skip the part where he goes to the king, where the king shows favor to Nehemiah's plight and gives him leave, and he is able to go back, and the king is even willing to pay for all this and to provide all the support that Nehemiah needs to fix this wall. But we're going to pick up the story again then today in Jeremiah chapter 2, where we really see two things. That beside a brief rest of 3 days, Nehemiah surveys the damage and then challenges the people. He surveys the damage and challenges the people. Sylvia has read us the story. She read how just like Ezra, when he returned, Nehemiah too takes a rest for 3 days after that long and arduous journey. He probably used those days to walk around the city, to take it all in. After all, this was the city. This was the homeland. This was part of the promised land, right? This was the place where God's name dwelt. This was a place of incredible significance for any Jewish person throughout the ages. And though he had been warned that the place was a disaster and laying in ruins. It would have been still hard to walk around to see evidence of that. On one hand, there is this restored temple, and yet there's those walls. Now, Nehemiah hadn't told anyone what he was up to, why he had even come, and so he goes out at night with just a few others, and he surveys the damage. Now, it's helpful to know that this city of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, was basically just a sliver of land on top of a mountain ridge. It was just a bit over a kilometer long and maybe 130 meters wide on average. And so there would have been lots of wall for a relatively small area of land. That mountain ridge had the Kidron Valley on the east, the Hinnom Valley on the south side, and on the west side there was the Central Valley. And the north side, well, it was still a lot lower. It was still a mountain ridge, but that's where most attacks would have happened, on the northern end. And so it's understood that that side of the city, well, the walls would have been totally destroyed. There would have been nothing left of it. No need to even survey the damage, or maybe he had seen the damage there. But for the rest, now he goes out at night and he surveys the southern portion of that strip of land, if you will, that wall around that mountain ridge. And what he finds is not good. The wall is indeed a mess. At one point, he couldn't even get by the rubble. So eventually he turns around, enters the city again at the same place where he had left it. And then we read in verse 16, "The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work." Yeah, it kind of makes me smile, all right, this part. I mean, it seems like Nehemiah was a bit of a schemer, right? He went out to survey the damage, but he knew all along what was going to be happening. And he hadn't told all these different groups of people what he was up to. He hadn't told all these people who would be doing the work. That much Nehemiah did know. That it was those people who were going to be doing the work. We're going to be talking more about that next week. Everyone was going to be involved in the rebuilding of this wall. Now, that rebuilding was going to take a lot of work. There was going to be sacrificial labor involved. This was going to be blood, sweat, and tears. And as we'll see, there was going to be lots of opposition to the rebuilding of this wall. And so there were some obstacles for Nehemiah to get all these different people involved in the rebuilding. And so he challenges the people. First, he surveys the damage. Then he goes on to that second part where he challenges the people. Verse 17, "Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." In a sense, fresh eyes to all this brokenness had arrived. The fresh eyes snuck out of the city at night, surveyed the damage, now returns, pulls the people together, and he shares the vision. And he states the obvious. He makes clear that which is broken. He points out the broken state of the walls. And then there's a clear call to action. Let's rebuild this wall. Let's rebuild and restore and fix that which is so broken, which in a sense you've just learned to put up with. But let's rebuild it. And he includes some motivators because this was going to be hard work, costly work, sacrificial work. And so he adds this little, so that we will no longer be a disgrace. Let's rebuild this thing at great cost, no doubt, but let's rebuild this so that we can take some pride again in this place, which has such incredible significance to us as God's people. Let's rebuild this thing. And then he adds a second motivator, and the second motivator is really found in the telling of his own story, verse 18. "I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me." Right? So Nehemiah says, so let's rebuild this thing so that we will no longer be a disgrace. And let me just remind you that how I got here. I mean, God's hand is clearly on this project. God's in this. Let's rebuild it together with him. Let's fix that which is broken. And those two motivators combined, bring the people to a willingness to see this brokenness, to recognize it for what it is, and to begin to rebuild it. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. Wonderful story. Wish that was the end of this part of the story, but there's a couple more verses to go. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about this, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" There would be opposition. There's 2 entire chapters in this book devoted to the opposition that they endured. We're going to be looking at that next week. But it's not just the opposition that we see in these verses. We also see a measure of faith and confidence and perseverance, right? Because verse 20, "I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it." Again, we'll be looking at some of that too. Not just the opposition, but the faith and the perseverance and the being convinced about the need to rebuild and the willingness, to work at that. But for now, let's stick with the surveying of the damage, because it's so easy to skip over that. It's so easy to miss that which is actually broken. It's so easy for us to be blind to our brokenness personally and collectively, because again, sometimes that brokenness has developed so gradually that we just didn't recognize it, or it's been broken for so long that we've learned to put up with it. So let's survey the damage. What's broken in your life? What might be broken in your family? I mean, again, it's pretty easy to not recognize it, right? So let's maybe consider that Lord's Prayer, that statement in the Lord's Prayer. "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." What if God's kingdom came into your life, into your family's life to a greater measure? What would change? That might just give us an idea where the brokenness is. What is broken in your life? Is it your health? Your mental health? Is it hope that has been broken? Or faith? Are there relationships that are broken with extended family members, or with your church family, or a spouse, or a child, or a parent, a neighbor, a co-worker? What's broken in your life? Is it maybe love that is lacking? Maybe the brokenness has to do with a lack of holiness. Maybe it has to do with a lack of empathy for the poor. The kingdom of God came into your life. Maybe there would be a greater outrage at the injustices of our communities. At the end of this message, we will give you a couple minutes to bring your brokenness to God. For now, I want us to consider what might be broken for us collectively. What might be broken on a national level, or a world level, or a provincial level, or in the community. I mean, here we are, more than a year into a pandemic. There's so much brokenness related to just that alone. And then today, as we pause to remember the horrific events that took place in Colchester County last year, there's so much brokenness. So I want to focus in a little bit sharper yet, and want us to consider what might be broken in our church family. What might be broken in us as the family of God, the church is an organization, if you will. What brokenness might we have become blind to? I mean, I'm a pretty optimistic guy. I tend to see the glass half full. There is much good to celebrate. Even this past year, in the midst of all the difficulties, there's just been some incredible things happen. I choose to celebrate that. I choose to focus on that. I take full responsibility for that. I've been pretty loud and proud about this whole thing, about the success of our small groups, the growth in that area. I've told you that over the 19 years of pastoral ministry, I've never seen this much evidence of spiritual growth in the churches I've been leading. So I mean, there's a lot of really good things happening, but I also recognize that with my choice to celebrate the good, I also tend to kind of not necessarily face that which is broken. So what might be broken for us as a church? What might we be blind with and just grown used to? It's like, well, that's just the way it is. Well, instead of letting you pick that which is broken, which you could do, and I would love to hear from you, but I want to lay this one out, because I think it's about as obvious as the broken walls of Jerusalem in Nehemiah's day, even though we've grown used to it. What is broken in our churches? Well, let me call it this: an effective outward movement of the church. An effective outward movement of the church, because the church doesn't exist for itself, right? The church exists for those who do not belong to the church yet. Well, that's one way to look at it. You and I both know that the church has struggled with the go part of the Great Commission. The Great Commission, of course, being go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. That's Jesus' great commission to his followers, to go make disciples. And we're not very good at it. For decades, we've been trying to get people to come. And it's worked a little bit, praise God. But we haven't really found effective ways to go. We're not the only church that struggles with this. The previous church are forever pushing up against the same challenge. And I was full of energy and passion, and I was willing to upset the apple cart at times to really push people. And finally, one of the ladies really got a little frustrated with me. And at a congregational meeting, as we were talking about these things, and as I was challenging people, she literally stood up in the meeting and she goes like this: "What's there not to like?" As in, why do we need to change all these things? Look around you. What's there not to like? And she looked around her and she saw all her friends that gathered every Sunday morning that she worshiped with, that she prayed with. What was there not to like? Well, what there was not to like was all the empty seats between the people. See, way in its history, those seats had been filled at one point, but then bit by bit, they emptied out. And now they had been empty for a long time, which is made for really comfortable seating arrangements for all those of us who were there. And what's there not to like? The empty seats were there to not like, because each of those empty seats represented a person in our community that was going through life without Jesus, who was facing an eternity outside of the very presence of Almighty good God. What's there not to like? The empty seats. What's there not to like is the inability, the ineffectiveness of our outward movement. Again, don't hear me say, though, that nothing is happening, that people aren't trying. But the truth is, we haven't been very effective in actually making disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them. That's what there's not to like. It's not like we haven't tried, it's just that we haven't figured it out how to do it effectively. The church in the West has been farming backwards for decades. Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, these are Canadian statistics, released a survey in January 2020, pre-pandemic. I know, the pandemic hasn't helped with this thing because none of us are going anywhere anymore, right? So it's really hard to have an outward movement when you're not even going yourself anywhere. But this is pre-pandemic, this problem, right? This survey showed us that in Canada, in 1996, 12% of Canadians would call themselves or would identify as an evangelical Christian. 10 years later, that number had dropped from 12 to 9% of Canadians. A mere 5 years later, 2020, it was 6%. We failed. That's what there is not to like. It's broken. 77% of respondents to this survey said that they attended church services less now in 2020 than they did when they were 12 years of age. Now, for some of that, it would have been decades earlier. For some of that, it might have just been 5 years ago, right? But it's broken. It's broken. Our outward movement is damaged. The go part of the Great Commission is ineffective. And I'm afraid that we barely see it because it developed very gradually and it's been broken for a long time. We find ourselves sitting in churches pre-pandemic, hopefully soon post-pandemic, saying, what's there not to like? What's there not to like is the empty seats. What's there not to like is the need for a second and a third church service, the house, and to accommodate all those who are following Jesus. So, church, let's plan to rebuild. Let's plan to see this thing that is broken, that outward movement, let's see it fixed. That there may be life again by more and more, that more people will be able to experience that abundant life in Jesus, the hope that we have in Jesus, the ability to have hope in midst of very difficult circumstances, the ability to grieve with hope even in the midst of tragedy. And in that, let's remember Christ's promise that he gave when he gave us that great commission. And I will be with you till the very end of the age. So, go, make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them, and I will be with you till the very end of the age. Because yes, there will be opposition. There will be opposition when we set out to fix this thing. But with Nehemiah, I really, truly believe we can say the God of heaven will give us success. Now, as I said earlier during this message, that we would give you some time to consider the things that are broken. We began to tackle this issue of a broken outward movement. We're going to pick that up again next week and talk about opposition, who's all involved in rebuilding and all that. We'll be talking about that in the weeks ahead. But for now, take a moment to consider those things that are broken in your life, in the life of your family, and take some time in prayer to bring that before God.